Hey everyone. Tonight, let's dim the lights a little. Set your phone down on the nightstand. Take a breath. We're drifting back to a quieter, colder world, where the candles burn low, the floors creak, and rumors have an unsettling amount of authority. A world where accusations linger longer than evidence, and where being cleared of wrongdoing often just meant surviving long enough to be forgotten. Because tonight, we're not focusing on the trials themselves. Not the shouting, not the flames. Those stories are loud, and they tend to keep people awake. Instead, we're doing something softer, something stranger. We're going to talk about what happened after women were accused of witchcraft, after the courtroom emptied, after the judges went home, after the village decided it had moved on, because of course it had. So settle in. We'll take this slowly. In early modern Europe, being accused of witchcraft was not a single moment. It was a stain, a kind of social weather that followed you. Even if the trial ended without execution, and many did, the accusation itself was enough to rearrange the rest of your life in quiet, grinding ways. Let's imagine a woman who survives her trial. Already she is lucky. She might be acquitted, or the charges might be dropped for lack of evidence. Or perhaps the authorities decide she's misguided rather than malicious, which is a comforting word that still ruins everything. The courtroom doors close behind her. She steps back into daylight, and this is where the real consequences begin. Because the village remembers. They always remember. Neighbors who once borrowed bread now cross the street. Children are pulled indoors when she walks past. Livestock that dies suddenly is still blamed on her, even though the court technically cleared her name. Courts could acquit. Villages rarely did. And of course, she now has a reputation, which is a problem because reputation was currency. Without it, you were functionally invisible, or worse, noticeable. Many women accused of witchcraft were already on the margins before the trial ever began. Widows, elderly women, poor women, healers, midwives, women who talked too much, women who didn't talk enough. The accusation didn't knock them down from a high place. It confirmed what people already wanted to believe. So after the trial, they returned to lives that were smaller than before. Some women were banished outright, not always officially. Sometimes the court would suggest, gently, that it might be best if she relocated. Somewhere else. Anywhere else. Preferably far enough away that no one had to think about her again. This wasn't mercy. It was administrative convenience. So she would leave, carrying what she could, walking to the next town where no one knew her name, where she could try again. But here's the problem with early modern Europe. People talked. Accusations traveled. A woman without family, without references, without a clear past, was immediately suspicious, especially if she was older, especially if she was alone. And so the cycle often restarted. Some women found work as servants, if they were young enough, healthy enough, quiet enough. Others survived through begging. Others attached themselves to distant relatives who were not thrilled to see them, but were also not eager to be accused of heartlessness. Hospitality could be a defensive strategy. For women who returned home, life was awkward at best. Their property might be gone. During trials, possessions were often seized to pay court costs. Even acquitted women sometimes found their homes stripped bare, livestock sold, furniture gone, bedding missing. The legal system had been paid, and it had been paid in her things. If she had a husband, and many accused women did, her marriage did not necessarily survive the accusation. Husbands testified against wives. Wives testified against husbands. Survival does strange things to loyalty. A woman cleared of witchcraft could still find herself quietly abandoned, or returned to resentfully, because now she was dangerous. Not magically dangerous, socially dangerous, a liability, someone who attracted attention. And attention in these communities was rarely good. Children of accused women paid the price too. They were known, marked. Other children were told not to play with them. Apprenticeships dried up. Marriages became complicated negotiations, full of reassurances that no, the witchcraft did not run in the family. Or if it did, it had been dealt with thoroughly. Which brings us to another unsettling detail. Surviving a witch trial did not mean you were considered innocent. It often meant you were considered probably guilty, but inconvenient to execute, which is a very specific category to occupy. Some women were released under conditions. They were ordered to leave town, or forbidden from practicing healing, or required to attend church constantly, publicly, obediently. Missing a sermon could reopen old wounds and cases. Others were imprisoned for years without execution, not because the state wasn't sure, but because no one wanted to deal with them anymore. Prison was storage, a place to put people society had failed to digest. And then there were the women who confessed. Confession did not guarantee death. Sometimes it led to imprisonment, sometimes public penance, sometimes a grim sort of survival where you lived because you admitted everything you were accused of and then some. Confession made the authorities feel tidy. It made the story complete. But confessing to witchcraft meant living with that label forever. Confessed witches were watched, their movements tracked, their words weighed. Any misfortune nearby could bring everything rushing back. They became walking cautionary tales, proof that evil was real, and that it looked very much like a tired woman with worn shoes. Let's drift for a moment to Scotland. Scottish witch trials were famously intense, and they produced many survivors who lived long, quiet, haunted lives afterward. Records show women released after imprisonment who were forbidden from leaving town, forbidden from begging, forbidden from working in their former trades, which is ambitious, really. Forbidding a poor woman from earning money and from asking for help tends to end badly. Some were reduced to relying on reluctant charity. Others starved. Others broke the rules and were punished again. Because of course they were. In Germany, where witch hunts varied wildly by region, some women survived only to find themselves permanently ostracized. They attended church alone, sat apart, received communion last, or not at all. Religion was supposed to cleanse them. In practice, it reminded everyone that something was wrong. And yet, life went on. This is one of the most unsettling parts. These women didn't vanish. They woke up. They cooked thin meals. They mended clothes. They aged. Quietly. Under suspicion. Under memory. Some remarried, particularly widows who were still considered useful. These marriages were practical. Unromantic. A woman with a past married a man with limited options. They formed small, defensive households. 2 people against the village. Others never married again. Once accused, a woman's body was considered suspect, dangerous, too close to chaos. Celibacy wasn't always chosen. Sometimes it was imposed by social exhaustion. And then there were the rare cases of reintegration. Very rare. Occasionally, a woman survived long enough for people to forget, or for new scandals to distract the community, or for a new generation to grow up with only vague knowledge of the story. Time could soften even the sharpest accusations, especially if nothing dramatic happened afterward. These women became background figures, not trusted, not celebrated, but tolerated, which in this context was a victory. But even tolerance was fragile. A bad harvest, a sick cow, a sudden storm, and the whispers began again, because witchcraft accusations were not about magic. They were about fear, about control, about explaining things no one understood. And once a woman had been placed in that narrative, she never fully escaped it. Let's talk briefly about the elite women. Yes, they existed too. Noblewomen were occasionally accused of witchcraft, particularly when politics curdled, when marriages failed, when heirs died, when men needed explanations that didn't involve their own incompetence. Elite women accused of witchcraft were rarely executed. They were imprisoned, exiled, confined to convents, stripped of influence. Their survival was ensured by rank, not mercy. After their trials, these women lived carefully managed lives, writing letters, watching seasons pass from behind walls, knowing exactly why they were there, and knowing they would never be fully released, because power does not forgive easily. One French noblewoman accused in the late 16th century survived her trial only to spend decades in quiet house arrest, her reputation permanently compromised. She hosted no guests. left no memoirs, and vanished from history except as a footnote, which was perhaps the point. And this brings us to the quiet cruelty of survival. Execution is final, brutal, loud, but survival required endurance. It required living every day under a shadow, raising children who knew their mother had once been accused of consorting with the devil. Growing old in a place where kindness was conditional, some women internalized the accusations. They believed them. Trauma does that. Confessions linger in the mind. A woman told often enough that she was dangerous might eventually behave cautiously, timidly, apologetically, as if she truly were. Others resisted. They became sharp, defensive, bitter, which did not help their reputations. But then again, nothing would have. In the end, what happened to women accused of witchcraft after the trials ended was not a single outcome. It was a spectrum of quiet endings. Lives narrowed, choices limited, futures redirected. They were not freed. They were released. And there is a difference. So as you lie there, drifting, imagine the silence after the courtroom emptied, the sound of footsteps fading, a woman standing alone with her name still attached to something dangerous. History rarely follows her after that moment, but she kept living, and that somehow was the longest sentence of all. Let's rest here for a moment, and when we continue, we'll drift gently toward the next fragile bloodline, the next unfortunate royal decision, and the next reminder that history, when you look closely, is very tired indeed.